to the IEA channel. I'm Emma Revell, IEA Head of Communications, and today we're going to be discussing football. Yes, really. I'm joined by three esteemed colleagues, and between us we support a mixture of title-winning and not-so-title-winning teams. Mark Littlewood, our Director General, is a long-time season ticket holder at Southampton. Our Head of Education, Steve Davies, takes his dedication to Manchester City so seriously that he's wearing a City pin in his official IEA headshot. And Editorial and Research Fellow Professor Len Shackleton supports the mighty Southport FC. Personally, I'm a Sunderland fan, although I'm not quite sure what I did to deserve that. And in the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be looking at the economics of football in a time of coronavirus. Football in 2020 is going to look quite different to football in 2019. No fans in the stadium, bubbles for the team and backroom staff, and a much higher chance of seeing a game on free-to-view TV. But what does that mean for a game where money is often everything? So welcome, gents. Thank you very much for joining me. We're going to start by looking at the financial impact of the pandemic on clubs. So many, especially lower league teams who were already in a financially precarious position could be driven to the wall with no ticket sales. We've seen headlines in the last 48 hours saying we've got less than 48 hours to save football. Some on the left and within the industry are calling for national bailouts of companies. Len, you've written about this, particularly not just about coronavirus, but in previous years when we've seen football clubs struggling. How many clubs are we talking about, and what, if anything, should we be doing about it?
Well, I think the outside the upper reaches of the Championship and the Premier League, you're talking about potential catastrophe in this season. The top teams clearly a large part of their income comes from sponsorship, comes from TV. But when you get down in the dumps, where you mentioned Southport FC before, a team I've supported for 60 years. Once upon a time, they were in the Football League. Now they're in what is called Step 6, which means that they're in the National League North, and their average crowds are around 1,000, something like that. And income is very largely made up of gate receipts, bar receipts, and stadium advertising programs, things like this. All these things have disappeared, right? The costs of running a team are very substantial, even at low levels, and there is virtually no income coming in. And unless we can get back to having crowds and grounds, I think we should close down the leagues until this is over, because at the moment we're just throwing money, good money after bad. I don't think there's any point in continuing with a league at that level with no crowds.
I mean, Steve, Mark, what do you think? I know your teams are in a slightly loftier position than Len's, perhaps, but do you think we should close down lower leagues of football entirely, until we can get people through the gate?
I do think so, yes, because as Len explained there, what we've got at the moment for virtually like 90% of the teams in the UK is lots of outgoings in terms of running the team, paying the players, paying the trainers and staff and so on, but no income. And that simply is not sustainable. And football isn't unique in this. It's the same situation that's facing the theatre, quite a lot of the hospitality industry, and the entertainment industry. And it actually makes more sense to put the whole industry into suspended animation, if you will, so that instead of having lots of teams go through the bankruptcy procedure, it would make more sense to simply close everything down, mothball it for as long as it takes before you can have crowds again. Now, if you can have crowds, that might alleviate the situation, but the problem, of course, is how many would there be? And in some ways, having a relatively small number of people for, let's say, a championship team or a Division 1 or 2 team might not be enough to save it. It might be just as bad in a way as only marginally better than having no crowd.
Isn't the issue here my understanding, and although I much admire Len's long-standing support of Southport, I probably know more about the Premier League and Championship level, where Southampton have tended to be, over my support for them. The fixed costs are the player contracts, right? So it's not completely obvious to me that if League One doesn't start playing again or postpones all their fixtures till February, if I'm a League One centre forward, doesn't the League One club still need to pay my salary? My understanding of the Championship level, I was interested in what Len said about where the disaster could be. I suspect it's actually the Championship level that could be the complete catastrophe. I don't know enough about how much a Southport player is paid, But in the Championship, the average player salary bill is 107% of income. And I'm not sure, it's not clear to me legally what happens if you mothball the season. You still pay the players, right? I mean, the players were paid before Project Restart happened. So isn't the solution out of this is some agreements going to have to be made with the Players' Trade Union, the PFA, to take a huge haircut on salaries, or to rethink how we do player salaries. Player salaries will now be, I don't know, a proportion of gate receipts. And therefore, if the gate receipts are naught or low, the player's salary is very low. Otherwise, don't Southport have to keep playing their players, or QPR, or Southampton, or anybody else, even if the fixtures aren't taking place? And that's what's the real drain on resources, is that players don't come cheap. And in fact, most clubs are deciding to pay their players a total wage bill of higher than their income, probably not sustainable in the long run anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the point which Steve made earlier, I think, is important, that by continuing, you're actually incurring extra costs, because it actually will cost more to put on games than you're getting in, obviously. I think certainly at lower levels, contracts are probably renegotiable in a way which they might be more difficult higher up. A lot of players essentially on part-time or very short-term contracts. So it would be possible, I think, via that route to mothball clubs, as Steve says.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. I agree with Mark, though. It is going to be legally very difficult for Championship and Division 1 and 2, because, as he says, there's a legal undertaking in the players' contracts to pay them no matter what. I mean, these are people who get paid when they can't play for a whole year when they're injured, for example. And also, it's worth saying, football contracts have a special privileged legal status. They're uniquely the only kind of obligation that takes precedence over the taxman. If a club is wound up, for example, which the Inland Revenue has been trying to get changed for forever virtually, but with no success. So I think that if we were to mothball Divisions 1 and 2 and the Championship, then this would have to be either a big deal with the PFA, or you'd have to actually have some legislative action, I think, to actually suspend the contracts. And who knows what the result of that would be. It could be very interesting, to put it mildly.
Remember, you mentioned the point about there's more on free-to-air television. I don't know what the demand would be for lower league football, but Len, is there any chance that rather than getting 1,000 Southport fans to a match, you at least get, I don't know, 700 watching it being streamed on the internet for at least, a £5 a time or something? Could it be a switch of business model?
That is possible, and indeed, Southport actually ran some experiments over the summer where they showed old games, which they had for various reasons. They had, when they'd been on Match of the Day or various things, where they got a full 90 minutes, and they actually charged for that and made a little bit of money. I think it would be possible to do something like that, but I can't see the uptake of it being sufficient really to replace the money which you get from crowds.
Is now, the pause that we've had in the football season because of coronavirus and the difficulty we've got getting it back, is now a good time to reassess the role of money in football generally? In recent years, there's been a lot of criticism that the game is putting TV above turnstiles. Games are being scheduled at really difficult times for fans to attend because it's more important that they're on the TV at 7:45 kickoff. And Mark and Steve, you've both done media appearances in the past talking about wage caps for players, and sort of, Mark, you've specifically said, it's too late. The horse has bolted basically when it comes to wage caps. But as all three of you have said, money is tight now. So is that kind of thing a solution? Should we be looking at maybe football? Money isn't the most important thing in football, or is it's always going to be the most important thing?
Well, money is obviously the most important thing in one sense, because football clubs, professional football teams are commercial enterprises. And so without the money, then they're not going to be able to succeed. The problem, as Mark indicated, is that football clubs, because of the incentives that they face, typically spend more in salaries than they get in income, which is just not sustainable in the long run anyway, never mind COVID. And so the question is, how do you deal with that? Now, the Divisions 1 and 2, the Football League, have actually introduced a salary cap. But the PF is currently not taking effect because the PFA has brought a lawsuit against it, claiming they weren't properly consulted. But if the situation is general collapse, then I think actually the incentives will change, and in that case, the negative payoff, if you want to use game theory, for sticking with the way we do things at the moment will become so severe that the teams and even the PFA will have to agree to some change in the way that salaries are negotiated and paid.
The interesting thing, though, is it's not that everything comes down to money, it's that money comes down to everything. There's football's an almost perfect competitive market. There is an almost exact correlation between what you pay for your playing staff and how well you perform in football. If you were to take the 4 teams that are represented here, Sunderland, Southampton, Manchester City and Southport, you will find that those 4, I think, are almost perfectly correlated. Manchester City spend an absolute fortune on players and salaries. Southampton sort of middle-ish for the Premier League and are indeed a middle-ish Premier League team. Sunderland probably on the high end for League One and underperforming a bit. And Southport will be very, very low. Southport started to spend on their playing staff what Southampton are paying on their playing staff. Southport would be back in the Football League pretty fast. So other than expecting players to do this as a hobby rather than a career, to sort of say, well, why don't you just play for the love of the game? I don't see why you should be earning more than 50 grand a year to be the centre forward for Manchester City. We could ask Gordon Taylor and the PFA whether his members are willing to accept that sort of deal and just do it for the glory, not the cash. But other than that, it is a near perfect market. And that's one of the reasons why there's no profit margin. It's impossible to, some teams will sometimes get lucky or have some magic formula like Leicester City a few years ago, but pretty much the more money you put on the pitch, the better you do. So it's not obvious how you would make a 10% profit. You've got 92 clubs and more in non-league competing against each other.
I can't see pay caps coming back except in a very short term thing. I mean, I'm older than you guys, but when I first started watching football, of course, there was a maximum wage of £20 a week and £16 in the summer, right? And you got paid this if you were Tom Finney or Bobby Charlton or somebody, or if you were playing in what was at that time Division 4. That was clearly an unsustainable position. We're not going to go back to anything like that. I often do wonder, though, whether we've actually, because of the way we've changed rules in football, we've also worsened that position. During the tail end of the last season, when the Premier League were playing behind closed doors, they had 5 substitutes. Even during a normal game, they have 3 substitutes. That means there's 7 on the bench, right down to League 2. This means this gives top clubs an extra advantage because they've got 4 internationals on the bench or whatever it is, and so games are much more predictable. Even if Liverpool are losing at half time, they've got 3 or 4 other people they can come from, and they'll come back and they'll equalise or whatever it may be. I think we could look at the actual playing rules to find ways in which to make everything a little bit more even. But I can't see salary caps lasting in the current climate.
The interesting thing, Len, I don't know the history here, and it might be that you do as an older and wiser football fan than I am, but it also seems to me that there were and indeed are workarounds. So when there was a wage cap, clubs might put an extra £5 in your boots in the boot room. You could imagine now, even if we applied a wage cap at, say, the Premier League level, you can't pay anybody more than £20,000 a week. It's okay, you're being paid £20,000 a week. But I also have a great sponsorship deal with Gillette and Nivea hand cream that will pay you £50,000 a week to be the face of Nike, Adidas or whatever else. It seems to me that it would be a game of whack-a-mole. You'd be paid for your promotional work rather than playing football, and you can't really close that down.
Remember that row there was with Wayne Rooney some years ago, where he had some kind of image deal, didn't he, or something like that? That was on top of what Manchester United were paying him. So there are ways around these things. I mean, as free marketeers, we know that there are always ways around price ceilings or whatever it may be. So football is no
Well,
exception in that respect.
Not necessarily. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think realistically we are going to see this kind of system, but the Americans show that you can actually do this, because in the United States, they do have salary caps. And they're very strictly enforced, and they have things called revenue sharing, where if you're an individual star, even a mega star in one of the American professional sports, if you get money sponsoring you, you have to share it.
But this is essentially a cartel. We haven't got that kind of arrangement.
I know, that's the big difference.
They don't have any relegation. They don't have any promotion. It's just the same teams year after year. And they even do things like, the draft, don't they, where the bottom club is the first pick of the new entrants and so on.
But the interesting thing about I agree. I don't think we could move to that. But in effect, in America, your employer is the NFL or Major League Baseball,
precisely.
And then you're just sort of farmed out to a team. I mean, it's a bit like for Southampton, your employer is Southampton Football Club, and you're either playing for the main team or the reserves or the academy, and it's just that on a scale writ large.
Exactly,
so, to all intents and purposes, the New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees is really an employee of the NFL, who just happens then to be farmed out to one of the NFL franchises. I mean, they're franchises, they're not clubs, and that would be a whole different model of imposing it. But I still don't think there's any limit on what a star American player can earn by being in McDonald's adverts or whatever. It might be that they're obliged by contract to share them with their team, but you could theoretically be paid millions and millions a year to do Gillette radio adverts or whatever.
But it's surprising how, seldom that actually does seem to happen. Obviously, when you get to the very top levels, you do get that, but it's the Michael Jordans and Shaquille O'Neals of this world. But it's nowhere near as common as it is in football. With top level, say, Premier League football, a lot of the really top players there get as much money from their personal media rights as they do from their actual salary. And there's lots of pretty hard negotiations with the team as to what proportion of it they get to keep for themselves.
I mean, this is true of other sports as well. I mean, people like Roger Federer earn as much from sponsorship as he does from tennis, for example. Yeah. How important is football to the wider economy? I mean, obviously, the four of us have missed it a great deal while the season was cancelled, but there are plenty of people out there who probably think, well, I wouldn't notice if my local club went bust. How much does football as a game add to the UK economy?
Well, I'm in a rather strange position. I think in the specific case of, say, Manchester, it does add a great deal to the local economy, not just because you've got two very big teams with lots of fans and lots of money coming in associated with them, but also because there's a kind of penumbra of other things that are brought to Manchester because of the two teams, in things like leisure, entertainment, all the rest of it. But I think that in most of the country, it's actually really marginal. They're not particularly large as businesses, football teams. So I don't know how it is.
Most of them will come under the definition of an SME, wouldn't it? They're less than 250 employees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Southampton is allegedly, reportedly up for sale. The asking price is £200 million for a mid-ranking Premiership team. That's not a colossal business. I think it's got about 400 staff. I mean, Steve makes a special exception for Manchester. I'll make a special exception for Southampton then. That, it brings people into the city centre. The pubs do better because there's a football club and all of the rest of it. But if you'll start saying that one business has positive overspill effects on others, this just never ends. I mean, the pubs do better because there's a cinema, the cinema does better because there's a curry house, and all of them do better because there's a football club. It's absolutely small beer, really, and certainly compared to the place that it commands in lots of people's hearts. And I mean, I'd be absolutely devastated if Southampton went bust.
Well, this is
but that doesn't alter the fact that it's still actually a fairly small enterprise compared to, say, Southampton Docks or the Yacht Show or whatever. It's a bigger enterprise than the football club in many ways.
Well, this is what I was going to say. It's as much about the emotional place that a football club holds in an area. And I mean, Sunderland managed to get a Netflix documentary out of consecutive relegations, but for anyone who's watched that, it's as much about what the team means to this city as a whole, as much as people being employed by it. It is going to pubs and things that are adjacent. Just pivoting slightly, we've talked a lot in other IEA videos about deregulation that has come as a result of the coronavirus and regulations that we hope to not see return, basically. Protecting turnstile revenue for clubs was a justification for keeping the ban on not being able to show 3 p.m. kickoffs on a Saturday on TV. This was one of the rules that was suspended during the pandemic when football came back towards the end of the season, when we were all stuck at home. We could still watch a bit of football. Do you think it will come back? Should it come back? Or I'm personally going to profess my opinion. I'm delighted it's gone. I don't think it should come back. What do the three of you think?
I don't think it should come back. Total waste of time. Quite apart from the fact that I do not think that having football games on live TV actually reduces the game, because there's a special experience about going to a live football match, which is, brings a premium. People are going to do that, whether it's on the telly or not. And quite apart from that, though, the technology now makes it so easy to stream games from various kinds of, dodgy websites, that I think that was a dead letter anyway. So the only people who are going to lose out, really, if they do away with it permanently, are various websites based usually in Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I suspect that I don't know what all of the knock-on effects are going to be of this. I'm speculating, but it seems to me that when we had Project Restart, in fact, every Premier League game was televised, and that's also true for the month of September, when the fans aren't in. So actually, Crystal Palace versus Southampton last Saturday, that was on at 3 o'clock on television. So it would have been the first, first division top flight game to have been on at 3 o'clock on. It's a bloody awful game, to win, but nevertheless, I suspect that we might be moving to a situation similar to American sports, where every top flight game is actually going to be available on television. You'll go to a football station and hit the red button if you want this, or hit it twice if you want that. It seems to me we've moved in that direction. I'm with Steve there as well. That I'm not sure that the trade-off here is that the more football's on television, the fewer people want to go to the ground. This was the rationale for the football authorities deliberately keeping football off television more generally in the 1980s. We don't really want too much of it. And snooker then became a top sport because the BBC, right, we'll put snooker on back to back. I don't think that harmed attendances at the Crucible Sheffield for the World Championship. Far from it. People see it on television. Oh, that looks quite interesting. I'd like to go. Had snooker not gone on television, then snooker wouldn't have filled the Crucible Theatre as easily as they did. So that's probably win-win. But again, I suspect might have some difficulty for the lower league clubs. If it becomes possible to follow your Premier League team on every single match, then perhaps you don't go down the road to your non-league team at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. I don't know. But I wonder whether the mix of this crisis and the possible change in televising football might actually mean there is a consolidation, and that overall 92 league clubs on their present footing might not be sustainable over the longer run.
Well, Len, you'd be the one losing out if Mark's right and it does squeeze out smaller clubs. So what do you think?
I don't think it would affect smaller clubs very much. I think the league and the FA have always been paranoid about this. I know Mark is a big fan of when Saturday comes. I was reading my copy of this last weekend, and there was a history of the attempts to televise football and all the objections that there had been to it over the years, and they've not been borne out. I mean, the kind of crowds we get now are vastly greater than we were getting in the 80s. Right across the board, really, even down to non-league level, you're getting some quite decent gates in the National League, for example. You're getting gates of 5,000 or 6,000 for games, which would have been a good crowd in the fourth division 30 or 40 years ago. So I don't think it would have that much impact. And I think in terms of regulation, I'm in favour of really letting the market rule on that. I'm not an armchair fan. I actually get bored stiff of. On Saturday night, I watched Match of the Day, and I watched the first game, Liverpool-Leeds, and what a boring, they were making out as the most fantastic game ever. At 4-3 in front of no crowd at all. The whole thing looked like a practice game, and I switched off after that. I didn't watch any more of it. For me, the game is all about atmosphere, about being there. And the TV experience, even at the best of times, is an ersatz experience. It's not the real thing. And I think real football fans will not stay at home and watch telly if there's a chance of going to a real game.
Well, that leads me nicely to my last question, which is going to be, we're hearing that DCMS are consulting on whether some fans are going to be allowed back into English football stadiums this weekend. They're looking at around about 1,000 fans maybe allowed into socially distance. There were already pilots in Scotland. If your team was allowed socially distanced fans in on whatever game they're playing next, would you be there, and how quickly? We'll start with Len, then Steve, we'll end on Mark.
I do intend to be there. I think the National League may well be allowed to have crowds, because they've already allowed it at the level below at the Northern Premier League and the equivalents in the South. Yeah, I will try and be there. I do wonder how social distancing is going to work on terraces, though. I do, I think people move around on terraces. They don't stand still for the entire game. Where they do, when you're in a seat, you more or less have to stay there. I also think that, some of the things, the Scottish pilot games, people were actually told not to shout.
No chanting, no shouting, no standing.
That's just absolutely crazy. I mean, I cannot believe that the kind of fans I see at football grounds are going to be constrained by this kind of rule. And, it does worry me that the authorities are then going to say, they can't behave, so we're closing them down again. But I also think that taking the knee won't survive a crowd actually in attendance either, which I think would be quite interesting to see. Steve,
would you be back at the Etihad?
Well, yes, I think I would. At least I'd try it. But I do think in a stadium with 30-odd thousand people capacity, it's going to be really strange to have just 1,000 people, presumably for social distancing reasons, dotted around a regular interval. So I would definitely go, but I'd also be very curious to see what it's like. I would add to what Len said, that if you choose the option on the television where you don't have the artificial crowd noise, which I think is an abomination, by the way, you'd undoubtedly get a really full hearing of the kind of witty and not so witty and abusive comments that you get from a lot of the fans, which might be rather interesting, I think it's fair to say. Normally they're drowned out by all the other people. You don't catch it all. But if there's only 1,000 people, I think you get quite a lot of it coming over pretty clearly.
Possibly not comments you could broadcast at 3 o'clock on a Saturday either, but we shall see. Mark, we'll end with you. My assumption is yes, you'd be there like a shot.
Absolutely. I mean, I've actually been in negotiations with the club who've been in touch with me, said that I'll hear this week what the protocols are on coming back. I've been a season ticket holder for 20 consecutive years with quite expensive season tickets, so I'm kind of hoping on any loyalty test I'll be in the first tranche who are allowed in. And I'm rather with Steve on this. I mean, a live football match where the ground is full, even if it isn't a good game, there's a good atmosphere. It's going to be a bit weird if there's 1,500 people there. But I'm such a Saints nerd. I have been to academy games and Johnston Trophy round 2 at St Mary's, so I kind of know what the place is empty like. But on so I'd like us to get back, as soon as we safely can, to 32,000 in the stadium. But to Steve's point, I think this might make each individual fan rather more important. Usually at a game at St Mary's, when I express my opinions of the referee, I'm pretty sure he can't hear them. That will not be the case if I'm only one of 1,000 people. And some of the players who I think aren't fit to wear the shirt or are not showing sufficient commitment, I can now be very confident will actually hear what I'm shouting to them, rather than just being drowned out by thousands of others. So it will be a weird experience, but one that perversely I'm quite looking forward to.
You'll be able to take the opportunity to address your complaints directly with the team. Well, thanks very much for joining me, and thanks to you, the viewers, for listening and watching. If you've enjoyed this chat or any of the other IEA content, don't forget you can subscribe to the IEA London YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. And if you're interested in supporting our work, a donation, no matter how modest, will help us continue our work during these tough times. You can find out more about how to donate and everything about the IEA on our website, iea.org.uk.